Back in August 2023, we were staying at an Airbnb in Hatch, Utah. The place had no air conditioning given Hatch's height, and the temperature was quite comfortable. This will be relevant later. Now, on the first night, my wife and I watched the stars as the sky was devoid of light, pollution, and clouds. I had my GoPro set up, and my phone was taking pictures, and we just looked up enjoying the stars. Then my wife showed me that appeared to be the only small satellite floating in the sky. When we looked at it, however, it multiplied into 3 lights in the shape of a triangle. It continued to expand in the same manner until about 7 lights appeared in a larger triangle. That's pretty amazing in itself, right? But what was really strange was that the sky that was visible in that triangle was more or less frozen, like in the screenshot. And then that part of the sky moved with the triangle, while the rest of the sky around it was still. The best way I can think of to describe it is like the movie Predator and his active camouflage invisibility technology. The world behind it was visible, but sort of skewed, and this triangle flew across the sky for a few short minutes until it seemed to be rapidly rising and disappearing, or rapidly contracting. Around that time, we noticed that the street had gotten eerily quiet with us too. No crickets or anything else. Even the wind seemed to have died down. After that, we decided to spend the night since we were both pretty weird. Of course, delighted, but also surprised. I got some good shots of the night sky, but of course, as usual, they didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Anyway, a few hours later that night, as we were about to go to bed, I wanted to try out a long exposure setting I found on my GoPro, so I stood on the porch and took pictures. That's when I heard a whistle. Anyway, I'm not a superstitious person, but I've heard stories, and not wanting to take any chances, I didn't answer the whistle. Soon there was a second whistle, the first one that hastened my decision to just go back inside. We were done. We just laughed, made sure the door was locked, and went to bed. Please note that due to the lack of air conditioning in this home, all windows have been opened for airflow. An hour or so after we go to sleep, my wife wakes me up to ask if I hear anything. It is at this moment we can both very distinctly hear the deep grunting and breathing of a bear or large animal outside our porch window. Not loud, but definitely very bassy. Heavy steps were heard on the porch as well. We woke up our friends and quickly turned on the light to look around. There were no footprints on the dusty porch and the soft mud around the porch, so this experience we simply cannot explain. Of course, our friends were asleep in their room, and they didn't hear anything, nor did they feel what they had seen outside before. Nothing more strange happened while we stayed there for the rest of this trip. But the last thing that happened, and this is the part that really surprised my wife, was that a month or so later when we got home, we were in the kitchen making dinner when she looked up and saw an owl on the fence, just looked into the house at us. At the time, I was unaware of the correlation between alien sightings and abductions and owl sightings, but I definitely am now. As far as we know, we didn't have any wasted time or anything, but it felt like we saw something we weren't supposed to, and maybe they were testing us to see if we were cool. It's all a little too much for my wife, and she's very uncomfortable looking at the stars anymore. On the other hand, I'm still very intrigued. We haven't seen any more owls lately, so who knows if it was just a coincidence or not. But I'm sharing this because I want to describe my experience and just explain it to someone out there. I would also be interested to hear if anyone else has experienced something similar. Fed up, I went hiking with my wife and stepdaughter near Laguna Mountain in California. We were off the main road on a secluded route that rarely saw cars, but there was no foot traffic in the area at all. And we heard a noise late at night which, to be honest, could logically be explained by something natural. I guess something that we just don't know about. However, my wife and I are both losing our minds trying to figure out what the noise could be, or what could have caused the noise. The first noise came around midnight, and we can only describe it as a slow, deliberate, rhythmic fingernail scratching at the taut paracord straps securing the tent to the ground. Naturally, we thought it might be a creature interested in the tent, but the slowness and rhythm of the noise leads us to believe otherwise, as such creatures usually scratch quickly and make more noise hastily, I suppose. Another conclusion that leads us to believe that it wasn't a creature was because all night long we actually heard squirrels running outside, curious about all our things that were outside. Why is this detail important? Because in the time before the noise and the time after the noise, we heard absolutely no creatures outside running towards or away from the tent. This means that anything that made noise was completely silent when approaching and moving away from the tent, or very creepily, could actually float or something. We heard it again around 2 a.m. that same night, and during this particular episode, the noise seemed to move from one corner of the tent to a corner closer to our heads, allowing us to even feel the vibration of the scratching reverberating throughout the floor of the tent. And this is what leads me to believe that they were stretched strips of paracord, because the tension allows the vibration to be much stronger. Now, we may have also heard the noise a third time, but it seemed so faint and lasted so little compared to the other times that we honestly couldn't quite place the noise. So we're not sure if it was actually the same thing, or was it just our mind playing tricks on us? That's the point. My wife and I were very excited when we heard this, and to be honest, it kept us awake and alert for a long time. We're also very interested in finding out what it could have been, and that's why I'm here. Has anyone had a similar experience or has an explanation as to what this could be? I'm 23 years old, female, from the UK. Between the ages of 9 and 11, I was best friends with a girl we'll call Sarah. She and I formed a small group in elementary school with 2 other girls. Their names were Lauren and Ellen, but we were best friends at first because we lived so close. So Sarah lived 1 street away from me. I always spent the night at her house, but she never came over because we were very poor and I was embarrassed about the state of my house. However, sleepovers became weekly, and only her and her mom worked every weekend, so we spent a lot of time in the house alone. She was showing me her mom's sleazy stuff from the 80s that had vampires in it. When I was 9 years old, I had no idea what was going on and just sat there oblivious. She always said, "Don't you want to do it?" and such things. She would also take her mom's toys and show them to me and make me hold them, which never seemed weird to me until I got a little older. But even then I felt uncomfortable. I was a very nervous child, and it was hard to make friends, so I often agreed with everything she said just because I was lucky enough to have a friend outside of school. But she would often make up scary stories, or do things that were a little creepy at night, like sing a pie in a baby voice next to my ear while I slept, or pretend her dolls were alive and wanted to punish me for drawing her attention away from them, which terrified me, but never surpassed me. HT worried me, I think. Although my mom was worried that I was constantly having nightmares at this point. None of this affected me too much, though, and so I remained friends with her. Later that year, I was mauled by a dog, a Japanese Akita, and had reconstructive surgery on my face. Because of this, I had to take medicine at a certain time, and my second friend, Lauren, walked me to and from the school office every day. Because of this, we became best friends, and I started spending the night at her house instead of Sarah's. Sarah didn't like that I was getting a lot of attention because of my fresh scar that I had, or that I replaced her with another friend. So she said that I was pregnant at 10, full of tears and plans and everything, including Ellen telling her mom at the end that as kids, we didn't even question the validity of her claim. At one point, she dropped it and then pretended she had cancer. I called her this time because I knew a lot about cancer because my aunt had it at the time, which she really didn't like. After that, she started calling me names, stealing my school stuff, making up lies about me and more, forcing our 2 friends to choose between me or her. It fluctuated a lot, so sometimes they were my friends, sometimes they were hers. But during that time, I often spent the night at Lauren's place, and many of my things went missing. The pink flip phone I just got as my first phone ever, it was like 2010, and my DS Lite, which was my prized possession at the time. My mom, she stepped in at that point and demanded that they find him because she knew I had taken him in for the night. Eventually, Lauren allegedly found them both wrecked on a road far from where either of us lived, and returned them to me completely wrecked a few weeks later. Later, Sarah and I were invited to a bath for Lauren's birthday, and this time, we got along as if my best friend was back. We kids were mostly left alone in the pool to mess around for a few hours. Also, an important note here. I really couldn't swim, and still don't. I had chickenpox during swimming lessons at school, and now I'm afraid of the water, so I've just not studied since then. Anyway, At one point, I got sick of being stuck in the shallows like an 11-year-old kid when all my friends were swimming in the deep bank. Sarah noticed this and approached me. She offered to pull me up and swim out into the deep so I could play with everyone else. I was very happy to be included. I didn't even think about that. She didn't like me very often, or that if she left me, I wouldn't really be able to swim back. I just jumped in and she swam us out. She started taunting me, knocking me to the side as if she was going to throw me, and I cried and begged her to take me back. I was afraid of water getting in my face or going underwater. It still cannot go underwater. However, she just laughed at me and then threw me under the water, and holding my head where I struggled and couldn't breathe. I remember struggling and not being able to breathe, but the next thing I knew, a lifeguard was pulling me to the side of the pool. I was gasping for air and shaking. I also have a horrible reaction to the smell of chlorine. It makes me sneeze and my eyes swell up, so I had to be taken away, but everyone told me it was an accident and just kids messing around. She later told me it was just a joke. I had to learn to swim and stop being a baby, which I guess was true. But still, after that day, I didn't want to be around her anymore. Our friends were still tossed between us. Some days I was her friend, other days I was mine, but it was good. I didn't care anymore, and I just felt bad for her. At this point, I avoided her like the plague. And I mean, elementary school is almost over, and after that, I never got to see her again. Eventually, we all went to high school between the ages of 11 and 16, and we all went to the same school. But my school was divided into classes, the first ones being the smartest and me, Lauren and Ellen being in the top class, and Sarah was not there. It was a nice buffer, and I got my best friends back and also made new friends for the first time, so I completely forgot about her, to be honest. But one day as I was walking home from school, I passed the corner store and there she was, blocking the road, seemingly waiting for me. Her school tie was tied around her head like a headband and she was crying. I tried to get around her and she growled at me and lunged at me. I was 4'7", 80 pounds, and she was much bigger than me, and I never fought. I really had no idea what to do to get her away from me as she grabbed my neck with her knees and her elbows. I just wanted her away from me. I grabbed her tie and pulled her as hard as I could until she fell to the ground and she just ran away crying. I remember walking the rest of the way home so confused. I mean, what did I even do to her to deserve this? I mean, at that point, I hadn't even talked to her in like 8 months, and she and our other friends were in the same teacher group, and they didn't mention anything to me. Eventually, I forgot about it too. I turned 12 in a couple of months, and the day after my birthday, I went to school having spent all my birthday money on new pens, which I was excited to show off. I know I was a bit of a weird kid, but the first lesson of the day begins. Ellen runs up to me and says, "Sarah brought a knife to school. She showed me to tutor, and she said she brought it for you." At first, I kind of laughed out loud at this, thinking it was some sort of joke, since any weapon brought into our school was grounds for immediate expulsion, and no one was stupid enough to try it, especially at 12 years old. I think I even joked that it was probably a butter knife. However, she repeated it. She must have been serious, but she told the teachers, and they did call the police at that point. Again, I just didn't believe her. It seemed crazy to me that they would call the police over a 12-year-old who brought a knife to school. But they did. The police arrived a few minutes later and that was it. I never saw the knife, but she was kicked out immediately. I don't know exactly why, me, or what she was planning to do, but she must have told a lot of people that she was going to do something to me because it was a joke the rest of the time I was at school. As a result, she went to the same school that my younger sister just went to. And she must have also told my sister that it was for me, but it was just a joke. Note, my younger sister is a year younger and a fighter. And at this stage, I had never been in a real fight. And my sister always fought with everyone who bad-mouthed me. She's real, of course, but her sister apparently hit her for it. And that was the last I heard from her until I turned 18. I turned 18 and went to university, and then out of the blue, Sarah tagged me in an old primary school photo. The whole class was in it, but she only tagged me. I found it a little strange, but didn't do anything about it. I mean, it was on my old Facebook account anyway, so I just ignored it. However, a couple of months later, it was Sarah's birthday, and she sent me a message asking if I would come to her birthday party. Mind you, I haven't spoken to her in about 6 years at this point, and the last time I mean she fought me and then brought a knife to school. So in the end, I just ignored the message and just got on with my life. I later saw that he and Lauren had reconnected and apparently became best friends again, which always worried me because Lauren and I had remained friends over the years, and she knew all about Sarah's treatment of me. But I never really thought about it. Also, it's possible they were friends all along, and Lauren stole my DS and phone because of Sarah, and they broke them together. The last time I saw her, I was 19, and I was on a date with my boyfriend walking down the street, and I saw her standing at a bus stop. It didn't really bother me as I hadn't seen or heard from her in years. Until our eyes met, she smiled, took out her phone and started filming me until I was out of sight. Now I have no idea why she did any of the things she did, and I feel the most sorry for her based on how her life has turned out so far. But I still hope I never run into her again. There was an Amber Alert recently, and my daughter asked me what the beep was. An Amber Alert is issued for those who do not know when their child was reported missing. If you get notifications, you know what I'm talking about. The alert sometimes provides information such as the appearance of the victim as well as the perpetrator, the location of the abduction, the make and model of the vehicle, things like that. Anyway, my phone started beeping one night while I was helping my daughter clean her room. Amber Alert. She asked about it. I gave her a little explanation, and that was it. However, it brought back childhood memories where I believe with all my heart that I almost got kidnapped when I was a child. Just to be clear, this isn't a memory that's been dormant in my subconscious or anything, and this random Amber Alert and conversation with my kid made it pop into my mind. This incident is something I have pondered and thought about for many years. By the way, I am a 41-year-old man, so it's been a while since I've looked into the factors and details of the experience, and this recent Amber Alert and conversation with my daughter really made me stop and think again about the incident itself, and here I am. As a parent, you worry about these things and do everything you can to protect your children, especially when you personally go through something really scary like this. Now, this happened when I was a little kid. I guess I was about 7 or 8. I can't be sure, but I think it's a safe estimate based on the fact that most of those early childhood memories are actually gone. I remember my experiences in kindergarten, which I would have been 5 or 6 years old, as well as later grades. But this incident must have happened sometime after, or maybe even around the age of 7 or 8. My parents took me to a nearby town to do some shopping. We lived in a small rural town with little to offer, so we would occasionally go to this nearby town, about 45 minutes from our place. I guess it just had a lot to offer, and they used to take me there for school clothes, to eat because the restaurants were better, and because my mom was a bit of a crafter, she liked to make things. That was her thing. There were various craft shops, and a fabric shop where she also liked to go. Now, on this particular trip, we went to a fabric store, Joanne Fabrics to be exact. It was quite a large store. As a little kid, I guess just about every place seems big. But no kidding, this was actually a pretty big place. My dad, he was sitting in the car, and I went in with my mom. He did that a lot growing up. He would just get in the car when there was a store he didn't want to go into, so I really can't blame him. I can't remember exactly what my mom was looking for or trying to buy in that store that day, but I do remember what section we were in, an area with lots of racks of different fabrics. Imagine a clothing store with round racks around which clothes are hung. And that's pretty much what this fabric store looks like. Racks with hanging fabrics. I remember that this area was a little closer to the beginning or entrance of the store. While my mom was perusing these racks, I kind of started wandering around, though not far enough to look around. I must have been bored and started loitering, but I could still see my mom just standing there and a few racks away from me, so I wasn't on the other side of the store or anything. Anyway, a random person approached me, and to be honest, I don't even remember where he came from. It was like 1 minute I was there by myself, and the next I looked up and saw this guy. It was like he came in quickly and out of nowhere, but I quickly looked over to where my mom was. She moved a few shelves up and away, but I could still see her. At this point, there was a little distance between my mom and me, and here I am standing behind some kind of cloth rack, and this older guy is in front of me on the other side of that rack. Then he speaks. "Hey boy, how are you?" I am silent because it took me completely by surprise. He asked, "Where are your relatives? Are you alone here?" I stood motionless and somewhat quiet. "Come here. I have something to show you." At this point, he began to advance towards me, going around the counter to where I was. I quickly moved to the other side, but he stopped and started to go around to the other side, as if to meet me in the middle. At that moment, I got scared and immediately realized that this person looked a bit dangerous and like he was trying to grab me. "Come here," he barked. I quickly joked to the left, but he did the same, and at that moment there was a real wild look in his eyes. In whatever direction I went, he went, but remember that there is a stand between us. To be honest, I am very grateful for this rack. After some back and forth between me and this man, I finally got through to my mom, and I'm yelling, "Mom, help!" You would have thought I was screaming bloody murder. It was so loud, but it got my mom's attention and did the job. "What happened?" she asked. This struck the man, and he looked over his shoulder in the direction of my gaze and confirmed that yes, it must be his mother. His behavior suddenly changes completely, and it seems like it's all fun and games, and he was just messing around and said the same thing to my mom. "I was just messing with him, no big deal, ma'am." My mom came to me, and when we reconnected, the guy just tipped his hat to my mom and walked out of the store. I explained to my mom what had just happened, that this guy was trying to get me. I was very upset and very shocked. She told me I did the right thing to yell and get her attention. It was awful, though, and I'm thankful that nothing crazy happened. Could I be imagining things, like maybe this guy was really just messing around? I seriously doubt it. I strongly believe that there were nefarious intentions. I mean, why would a random older guy browse a fabric store? If he was there for something like crafts or fabrics, why leave immediately when confronted? To this day, I sincerely believe that he was up to no good. All this happened about 10 years ago. I had just finished high school and was living with my grandmother at the time. At the time, I had no idea what sleep paralysis was and had never heard of any of these types of experiences. I've never done any drugs apart from smoking weed once in a while. Maybe 2 or 3 times a year before, but I've never had a problem with anything. One night right before bed, in my bedroom with the lights off and the door closed, I felt an extremely strange and unsettling sensation in my body. Suddenly my body felt extremely heavy and kind of fuzzy. I really don't know how else to describe it. I thought I fell asleep and kind of woke up. Only this time I couldn't move at all. As I said before, at that point I had never even heard of sleep paralysis. However, during this experience I seriously thought I was dying. I assumed I was having a heart attack or something, and something was seriously wrong. Panic set in and I started breathing heavily and trying my best to move and stand up, obviously to no avail. The next thing I know, a completely black silhouette of a man is walking from the door into the room. It was pitch black, as if a man had put on Vantablack bodysuits. The only thing that wasn't completely black was his head, which looked like static black and white film from an old TV. He came into the room, stood by the bed for a while before I could move, and then suddenly disappeared. I immediately grabbed my cell phone and typed out what I had experienced, hoping to understand what the hell had just happened to me. Then I learned about sleep paralysis and shadow people that people see and feel. After this incident, I started having trouble sleeping because I was so afraid of doing it again. I really can't remember how long later, although all of these experiences happened within about a year, but eventually it happened again. This time, I was visiting my brothers and sisters, living with my mother. I was in the bedroom with my younger brother playing PlayStation. The room I was lying on had a large bed, and next to it on the floor was a double mattress on which my brother was sitting. It had been a while since my last sleep paralysis experience, but just before falling asleep I felt a familiar feeling of heaviness. I tried to get up, but it was too late. I couldn't move, but I could see the room again. I guess my eyes were opened, but I guess I really have no idea. But I saw my brother still sitting on the mattress near my feet. I tried my best to scream his name to get him to shake me in an attempt to get me out of this sleep paralysis, but it didn't work at all. Facing the bedroom doors, one by one, 4 pitch-black shadows entered the room. This time they were pitch black from head to toe, without a static face. They are slowly gathering around the bed I was on, probably within arm's reach. They stood there for a while I went through, even to this day, the most terrifying experience I've ever had. I mean, pure terror. Then everyone spoke. When they did, it was like a booming, omniscient voice that didn't seem to be coming from them specifically, but just coming from everywhere around me. The only words they said were that the scene could not go unnoticed. Then they disappeared, and I awoke more terrified than ever. I've never told this story before, and I guess you could say I experienced sleep paralysis, but I didn't see anything during it, at least nothing like it. I really hope it doesn't happen again, but to be honest, I'm really afraid it will. If you have any advice on what I should do about this, or what it could be, please let me know, as I would really appreciate your input. I lost my father in 2021. He died at the age of 56. He worked in a factory where paint was produced. Because of his field, he developed scar tissue in his lungs. He had pulmonary fibrosis. He fought for 5 years but fell ill with bronchitis during COVID and passed away. Shortly after he died, I had another dream about my dad, and he was lying on the bed smiling with a thumbs up. When he appeared to me, he didn't say anything, and it was more like a feeling that I knew it was him. But he looked very young, and shone not in a movie or cartoon, but in some otherworldly way. I ended up crying in my sleep, and my mom woke me up. I must have sobbed. After that, I dreamed about him again about a year later, but this time it was different. I remember I was in my living room and my dad put a lazy bed in the corner of the living room. This chair was honestly his sanctuary. He spent most of his time in that chair, and I remember seeing my dad rocking in the chair with the oxygen tank next to him. He also has a very pronounced cough due to pulmonary fibrosis. In the dream, Dad was weak and sick. He rocked back and forth and coughed. As I got closer, his coughing grew louder until it finally turned into an angry, loud laugh. I also remember saying, "You are not my father," and trying to wake up. Then I realized I was stuck. I had sleep paralysis. My mom was lying next to me. It was really hard for her to lose her father, so the first year I moved in with her and slept with her because she hadn't slept alone in over 30 years. But it was at this moment that my mother must have felt that someone had climbed onto the bed, but there was obviously nothing there, so she woke me up out of fear. Obviously, neither of us spoke to each other, so it's a strange coincidence. However, when she woke me up, she was horrified and said she felt and saw the print of something crawling on the bed. Some time ago, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, around 2009 when I was still a kid, my family went to the Dominican Republic for spring break, and we stayed in Santo Domingo. It was a great trip, don't get me wrong, but I really only remember one memory from the whole vacation. I went into my parents' room in the rental house, which was next to the covered balcony, to get a bathing suit to change into. As I was leaving, I distinctly remember some creature crossing the gap between the double doors, visible only for a second, and I, so small, decided to run back to my parents rather than chase after it. None of them saw it, but I remember it even more strongly because I drew it several times as a child. I remember him being 3, 4 feet tall, white with short hair. It had human arms, hands, and legs, but a head with a protruding mouth and nose. The strangest thing is that his legs went backwards just like most animals, despite the fact that he walked on his hind legs. I've never heard a story like this anywhere, so I'm wondering if anyone can help me out. It's been in the back of my mind for at least 10 years now, and I'd really like to find out what it might be. So I'm 17, and this meeting was back when COVID just started. I stayed with my grandparents then, because my mother was working abroad. I stayed there for about 6 months, and every day I felt uncomfortable and paranoid. On November 13th, my grandmother went out to buy groceries, and my grandfather went to the other house to drink with other friends. That's what Filipinos do. So being a kid, I decided to explore the mansion a bit. Although I saw some things that were unnerving and looked creepy, I didn't find them as creepy as what I saw above. You see, my grandparents always had dolls. However, when I saw the shadow of a little girl around the corner, At first I thought I was just seeing a big doll, but when I got there, it was clearly not. Instead, I saw a shadow of something, but I didn't see the shadow connected to anything. I mean, there was just this shadow. Shadows are caused by something shining on them or something, right? But I didn't see anything that cast a shadow. There was just a shadow. At the same time, I was very scared and immediately went back down. But that wasn't the last time I saw it. You see, that same month, in the middle of the night, I needed to go to the bathroom. The room I was in was pretty far from the bathroom, so I had to walk for about 2 minutes, and because I was paranoid, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I made it to the bathroom as normal, and when I came out and went back to my room, I saw the same shadow again. But this time it wasn't the same shadow. This one looked like the shadow of a little boy. This time I just stayed still and stared at him until my phone's flashlight was on because my phone was heating up. And unfortunately, even after thinking about that encounter for so long, I really just can't remember what happened after that. Maybe it was because it was so long ago, but it really just went black after that. I told my grandmother about it, but she didn't believe me and just laughed. I know it sounds like a normal thing because it happened when I was so young and all these stories are, but I just can't forget the horror I felt when I saw those shadows, and I really remember exactly what happened that night. So if some of you guys listen to all the stories here, you'll know that someone has been watching my place for a while now. It's a bit of a drama, and I honestly wish I wasn't sharing it right now. I had weeks of peace with only the ping of my overactive camera system alerting me to people walking by with dogs or children. To be honest, I thought it was fine, and maybe not the most dramatic update, but it was just another scary tick to add to the list. So I got a warning about activities outside the garage. Honestly, given my garage door scrap, that's what I always pay the most attention to. I have weird hours at work and I wasn't on the phone, so at first I thought Dad was leaving for work. But a moment later I saw the recording made. This man boldly approached the car in the driveway, my mom at the moment, and tried the door handles before running away. I called the police with a good description and told them I had video of it, but my town doesn't have a big police force, and some of them are the same as other departments, shady and a bit lazy, I think. I've looked at him so many times and he has the same build as the man I saw in the garage earlier. Obviously, it's not definitive, but now I have more details about his description that I couldn't see before due to the lack of lighting and cameras and everything. I'm still pretty shaken up about it, even though he wasn't trying to get in or anything. Half an hour ago I was outside, though in a fenced yard. It also seems wrong to me because nothing is resolved, even though it may be unrelated. Is this really likely? For one person and or his house to attract so much concern from completely different people? That doesn't seem likely, does it? Also, to add some information, this person saw the camera before running away. I don't know if he would have tried more if he hadn't, but there is a little red and blue light on the front that goes around in a full circle. It is big and glows a little. That's why I thought they were holding back the creeps for now. And in the end, the police came to us, which very kindly did not call. Sleeping parents wrote all about it, but I gave all the evidence, and I really found the guy. I don't know if we're absolutely sure that this was the same person who was knocking on my garage or looking out the window, but I do know that they caught this guy, and my footage will be used in court, I guess. I don't know. To be honest, I highly doubted they would actually send someone because of the punishing text message. Non-emergency was closed and all, so I called the regular line. As I mentioned before in some other videos about this incident, my dad told me that there were a lot of car thefts in the area. But the weirdest thing to me, which I think I'm imagining or something, is that he looks, from some blurry camera shots, quite similar to the guy I had a one-night stand with a couple of months ago, right around when it all started. I really didn't think it could be him, but I hope that as I have to give the officer the ring shots tomorrow, I don't have access to them at the moment, I can ask who the person really is. I really hope it's over now. All this gave me great comfort. And unless I'm wrong and there is a second person, which is highly unlikely, this should be my last update of the thankfully closed section. I would really like your opinion on this situation and what you think can be done. So for starters, no one lives there. We just come there from time to time. This house was built in the 1800s, and after being renovated, it is still in place as it was originally, but looks a little different. This is from my husband and his brother, and they got it from their grandmother. The grandmother and her husband got it from the old woman who lived there. They agreed with her to take care of her, and in return they will inherit the house. Everyone in the village always said that that woman must be a witch. The woman died, and they got the house. And after the death of the grandfather, the grandmother lived there alone. Grandfather died at 60 years old, and grandmother died when she was 99 years old. She always said that there should be something out of this world in the house. She always heard strange sounds. She invited the priests for a blessing and hoped it would cleanse the house, but nothing seemed to help. Now my husband and his brother have some crazy stories from that house. When they went to bed, they would hear footsteps and Alexa would tune out many times with loud music. Their rooms have one more in common, and my husband often saw black shadows in the hallway. His dog jumped out of bed one day, started barking at the door, and was very upset. She was thrashing with fear, and the closet door opened, and she just didn't want to come out. His brother, when he was there alone when he goes to sleep, feels that something is always choking him. There were many such strange things. One day, when they were doing renovations, they decided to move some bricks that had been lying in the garden about 40 years ago and found bones underneath. The dog took one of them and chewed on it until my husband was able to take it away from her. And she died 3 months later from intestinal perforation. Coincidence, maybe? I don't know, but it's a little strange. There are a lot of other things, but I think you get the picture, and I wonder what we can do about it. Is the house cursed, haunted, or, I don't know, is there something there, demonic? And if there is, what to do with it? This happened to me back in 2008, early 2010s. When I was 11 years old, I met a girl my age in the 6th grade. She and I weren't in the same class until high school, but we did go to the same school, so we saw each other a lot. In the middle of 6th grade, things got a little creepy. One way or another, she was everywhere whenever I had extra classes, including whenever I had to switch from one schedule to another. My whole life, I never gave her my personal information, but somehow she just knew. Unfortunately, I reported this to the teacher or faculty, but they dismissed it as a trick because I didn't have enough evidence to confirm that it was actually her. To make matters worse, we were not allowed to provide information about electronic devices such as telephones for evidence against her, except for math and physics calculators or whatever. Amazing, right? Anyway, it bothered me for a long time. In 8th grade, she even took the same home economics and swimming class as me, but again, not in the same group. Even in 9th grade, she still followed me non-stop despite me warning her to leave me alone. After I graduated, I went to high school to start over, and although I forgot about her until mid-October 2012, she came back again. When I saw her, my skin turned pale and my heart began to pound. I was in a panic. I mean, this girl, how did she even know I was in high school? I mean, again, I didn't leak my information anywhere and certainly not to her. However, she didn't leave me alone again, and that's when things got worse. You see, guilt drove me to befriend her and let her use my stuff without my permission, and despite an earlier red flag that I should have avoided. Another time, she overheard me and a classmate talking about how I needed a keyring that my classmate had. The next day, she attacked me after I took my seat in class because she knew I wanted something she didn't. Again, really strange behavior. But this time, the incident caught the attention of the principal of my high school, and the principal summed up the whole situation by writing a report. I ended up having to rewrite everything twice because of grammatical errors and all. And the third time, the director made a decision. She was suspended from work for a week, but it did little good. She came back a week later and blamed me for suspending me, and I honestly wasn't even involved in her drama and all. I had no choice but to make my statement known. And again, she beat me up for other reasons, hypocritically calling me a terrible friend, and she even destroyed some of my belongings and supplies. I called her, but she pretended not to remember. To make matters worse, she framed the student for having a torn notebook that she destroyed while refusing to admit her mistakes. This was my last straw, as it made my blood boil a bit. But I didn't want to show my anger as she gave me the watch in exchange for the money which it turns out she cheated and got away with. But in all these situations, half of my peers and teachers witnessed these incidents and warned me that I should end my friendship with her, that she was not my friend. She just saw me as a pawn and manipulated me by taking advantage of my kindness and trust. Mind you, we were still in high school, but I quietly, directly started to distance myself from being around her anymore. That is, until the beginning of December 2012, because that was the last time I saw her, and I guess she was turned off after the last warning from one of my peers. I was relieved, but I will never forget what she did not only to me, but to the other half of my peers. It took me until almost the end of high school to realize that she really wasn't a very good friend, and that her attitude was kind of sociopathic and very creepy. In the end, it was the reason I broke up with her for good as well. Luckily, I didn't give her my phone number or address or anything because it was forbidden at school, and we had moved by that point. I guess I managed to avoid that red flag, for which I am very grateful. It has been a while since this incident happened, after I graduated from high school in 2015. I'm almost 27 and currently working, and this experience has definitely made it harder to trust someone or be friends with them again. It was a weird time for me, and last I heard she was in trouble with the law, and yes, again, definitely a red flag that I managed to dodge. A lot of strange things have happened in my house, but almost every case can be explained by something normal, I guess. Like my bedroom door that closed smoothly on its own, but my window was open. So I guess it could have been even if the wind wasn't blowing that night. But every situation is like that. For example, I can hear the floorboards creaking on the stairs when no one is upstairs or around. But it's an old house, and there are noises, right? I often hear or feel someone walk into the room when my back is turned. I look back, expecting to see my son or husband trying to sneak up on me and scare me, but no one is there. I also had the feeling of someone gently grabbing me when no one was around. This has been happening since childhood. Now I'm in my 30s. But there are some things that also completely freaked me out. One day I was standing in the hallway talking to my son, and I noticed this shadow on the wall above the door next to us. I assumed it was from the sunlight coming through the bathroom window behind him. The shadow moved like my son when he talked to me, but then he left, and it was incredible that the shadow remained there. At first I thought it was just my shadow, but I moved and the shadow stayed. He was still moving like when my son was talking to me. I tried to put my hands up in front of the window to block the sunlight, but I couldn't get my actual shadow to reach that height on the wall no matter where I stood. The window is unusually high on the wall. You definitely need a ladder to look into the bathroom from the outside. I actually recorded a video of the shadow to show my husband at the time. I could have sworn I saved it in my Google Photos, but it's not there now, so I have to look around for it. But the thing that scared me the most was when I opened the bathroom door to get out of the bathroom. The door suddenly swung open so hard, I honestly thought my son was messing with me, and that he grabbed the door from the outside and ripped it out of my hand, opening it wide. I immediately looked through the little hole in the hinges of the door to catch him trying to scare me and yelling, "Nice try." But when I got out and looked around, there was no one there. So am I just paranoid, or is there something going on? So I really don't know what's going on, and I don't know who to talk to. And I'm not necessarily rolling in the dough to hire a psychiatrist or a doctor or anything like that. I guess I just need some advice. I don't know if I'm going crazy. I want to know if anything like this has happened to anyone else, because I just don't want to feel alone anymore. So that's what happened. I was asleep, and I think I was stuck between sleep and wakefulness. I actually thought I was awake and tried to get up, but suddenly I just couldn't move. I've had sleep paralysis before, but this time was completely different. I was 100% conscious and aware, and at first, I don't think I was really afraid. I just laid there. I remember just thinking, how long is this going to be like this? After a few minutes, I tried to get up again and realized that I could move my arms, all parts of my body, but not at the same time. Imagine a phantom limb syndrome of sorts, but the difference here is that I don't have missing limbs. This is going to sound weird, I know, but I could have sworn I could move anything, but my real body wasn't moving at all. And the strangest thing about the whole experience was that I could see my hands as I moved them, while my real hands and arms remained somewhat still next to my body. So I was literally waving my arms around and I could see them, but they were transparent. And that's when I start to panic, thinking I'm actually dead or something. My knees were up in the air and my feet were on the bed, and the rest of my body was covered with a blanket from the waist down. When I initially fell asleep, I had my iPad with a case that had a stand on it. I grabbed my iPad and put it next to me. I felt the case close behind me and heard it close and saw it, but it felt lighter and like I pulled the soul out of my iPad, because it was also transparent when I grabbed it. I did this 2 more times, and my real iPad stayed on my stomach. It was only when I moved my hands and arms that I could see them, and when I stopped, they were completely invisible. Anyway, so I lay there for about 10 minutes, and I think I started to get bored, and I wanted to move my arms again and see what happens. I started touching my face, and it felt kind of squishy and just weird. The next thing I did was snap my fingers like in a cartoon where someone breaks all their fingers. And the second time I did it, something big crawled from my right shoulder to my body and bit my hand. Surprisingly, it didn't really hurt, but I could feel it. It felt like the teeth of a needle, maybe like a cat, and it stayed on me, biting into me. I saw it as it ran over my body, and whatever it was humanoid, but it moved like a primate. He had long, very thin arms, and he ran like a monkey with his knees close to his shoulders. Mind you, it was seconds, so when he bit, I thought it lasted about 19 seconds, which is really long because I couldn't move my head, and I could only move my hands, and they were just my spirit hands or something. I want to remind everyone once again that this was not a dream. I was 100% conscious and aware. Obviously, I couldn't move my physical body, but I was thinking and looking around for about 20 minutes before it happened. For some reason, I have no idea why I did it, but I reached out with my other hand and grabbed the back of, well, whatever it was, her head, and it looked like short hair, almost like a pit bull, like a dog's neck or head. And I saw him looking at me at that moment, and where eyes should have been, there were dark holes. I don't know if the eyes were there or not because I only saw it for a fraction of a second, because I think the shock made me just let go and watch him run after my legs, and then he looked around my legs and looked at me. Then when it stopped moving, it disappeared, because when it moved, I saw it as my hands. But after that, I must have snapped out of whatever it was, because all of a sudden I could move again and everything was back to normal. Strangely, I could still feel the bite on my arm for about 15 minutes. Such pain and pressure. To be honest, I just sat there and felt like what the hell had just happened. I still have no idea what it was. It has never happened to me again and never happened before. It was totally random and unexpected, and I don't know if I'm going crazy like I said or if I need to see a psychiatrist or a doctor or something, but whatever it is, it happened, and it's me very frightening. My mother and I are very into the paranormal and have been for a long time. In fact, even before my son was born, we were involved in paranormal investigations with some professionals. We also enjoyed watching all the paranormal programming on television, including reenactments, documentaries, programs, and investigative shows. Anyway, one night, like any other time, my mother and I were sitting on the couch watching Paranormal Hotel. While we were watching it, one of the paranormal experts said they were commenting on the stories and they explained why you should never mess with Ouija boards or demons or anything like that. I turned to my mom about it and said, "I wouldn't mess with them, would you?" And jokingly, and rather stupidly, she looked at me and said, "Oh, yes, I would." I knew she was joking, but I quickly warned her not to joke like that, as it could be taken as bullying by any spirits or entities, despite the fact that we have never experienced anything in our home or have reason to think that our house may be haunted. With all that I knew and researched, I just wanted to be careful, I guess. I then told her how spirits or entities can use electricity to enter our realm. My mom looked at me and shook her head, saying she didn't believe that was possible, but I told her again not to say that. This is where things get a little scary. Not even a minute later, as we were sitting watching TV, my left arm started burning, and it was like nothing I had ever felt before. At that moment, I realized that this was not normal. As I did so, I looked at my mom and told her that my hand was on fire and that I thought I had been scratched. I pulled up the sleeves of my t-shirt and lo, and behold, there was a big red scratch on my skin that got darker as we watched it. However, this scratch was in the shape of a capital letter Z, like a perfect Z. Me and my mother were very scared by it. My partner was at home at the time. I instantly went into the room where he was and showed him my hand, and he was also a little shocked by that. In addition to being scared to the point of shaking, I was also angry that something had come into our house and caused me such harm, especially when I wasn't the one making the joke. I called out to whoever was with us, saying that this is not welcome in our house, that he has no right to hurt me and that he should leave. But Mom also apologized for her joke. And then we turned off the TV. After that incident, I was never hurt by anything unseen again. To be honest, it was a very strange and horrifying experience for me. I have no idea how it got into our house, if it's still there, or if it took my words and left. I also want to emphasize that the Z that appeared on my skin came out of absolutely nowhere. Like, there's no logical explanation for how it happened. I was just sitting there, and one moment he was gone, and the next he was... Mind you, it was pretty deep, and like I said, in the shape of a Z. In other words, there's no way I or anyone else in the house could have caused it. But I wanted to know if anyone else has come across something like this. Does anyone know what or who scratched me? Does the letter Z scratched into my skin have any significance? As I said, there was no way I could scratch myself. I sat with my hands down and watched TV. There was no one near me, and the shoulder that got the scratch was on the side of the couch against the wall. So it's quite frankly inexplicable. That is, if you discount the paranormal. I'm 29 years old and paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair due to an accident when I was 14 that left me paralyzed with no feeling or movement below my nipples. After years of thinking about making my life easier and less stressful, I decided to have a colostomy. It was the smartest thing to do to make life easier for me. For this surgery, I will need to fast for 48 hours before the colonoscopy, and I will have a colostomy the next day, and I still can't eat until the surgery. That means I haven't eaten in about 4 days. Now, aside from my surgery being delayed by 3 hours, the surgery itself went well. I was awake and conscious, and everything went as planned. I would have to be admitted that night, and the next day, and possibly the third, depending on how the nurses felt. That night, after my day ended and my guests left, I spent the evening watching TV on my phone until I was tired enough to try to sleep. I can't feel that part of my body, so I didn't feel anything like that, but they gave me small doses of painkillers to make me comfortable, and so I could sleep. My room was dark. Only the light from the drip machine and the crackle of the blinds from my window illuminated the room from the parking lot, the streetlights from the hospital. I had some trouble sleeping that night, mostly feeling like I would sleep for 5 or 10 minutes, and then suddenly just wake up, but then quickly fall back asleep only to have the same process repeat itself over and over again. This went on until about 3 in the morning. Eventually I fell asleep again, but suddenly I woke up. But this time it felt like I had been woken up for a purpose. Or maybe it's better to describe it like this. I felt like I was being watched. When I woke up lying in a hospital bed, something in my right periphery caught my attention. I turned my head to the right and saw a very tall figure, at least 10 feet, sitting in a hospital chair next to my window. Sitting, this figure was so tall that its head almost reached the ceiling. I closed my eyes and opened them again, as if to make my vision clear because I didn't know what I was looking at. After that, the tall figure was still sitting and seemed to be looking at me, although he had no discernible eyes or facial features. Surprisingly, I didn't seem scared or embarrassed. In fact, almost quite the opposite, as it seemed to be there to comfort me. I would look at the figure and say hello. In a split second, almost as if I had missed his step, he suddenly stood at the side of my bed, towering over me, looking down. It is at this point that I must be running out of time, because the next thing I know I am still lying on my back, but in a completely white room with no walls, no light source, but very well lit. It's like I'm lying on a piece of hard rock, similar to granite. As I look up, I see 2 black figures, both the same size with the same body structure. However, what was really surprising, I felt like I knew which one had brought me to this new place, and which one I had yet to confront. At the moment, I am still quite calm, not afraid or feeling that any harm will be done to me. As I lie down, I turn to the first figure and ask him if he's okay, to which he responds with a simple yes, after which the other figure tells me, "We're just fixing you up." Then the first figure pulled up a silver dome with some kind of bright shining light shining over my head. Here I have a second breakthrough in time until this dome pulls away from my face, that is. As soon as I wake up, I turn to the first figure I felt I had the best connection with, or maybe just felt like it was someone I needed to talk to. I asked him what the purpose of this was. He doesn't answer, but the second figure turns to me and says, "You have a new goal." This is where my third time lapse takes place, and I float through the misty air outside, through the hospital window, back to my bed. Almost as soon as I got back into bed, I fell asleep. I then slept until 8:30 in the morning, and as soon as I woke up, it was the first thing I thought of. And it was so real. Nothing like any dream I've ever had. And I can remember every part of the experience. Apart from time slots, obviously. Immediately, I would Google the definition of amendment, a word I would likely never use in my life. Obviously, it means repair, restoring health and healing, making a bad situation better, that sort of thing. After that, I called my wife and told her the story of how I called when the shadow people kidnapped me. We were both very confused as to what this meant, but we both felt that it was real and not a dream. I also don't believe it was a hallucination based on the pain meds I was on, since it was such a low dose and shouldn't have caused anything like that. Plus, I remember everything so vividly. However, the figures were both very tall, at least 10 feet tall, and both pitch black with no human features that I could discern, at least other than the shape of their bodies. I remember not seeing any fingers, nose, or any facial features. It was more or less just a huge shadow. I don't necessarily know if they were talking back to me, or if I heard their voice telepathically, mainly because there wasn't really a mouth. Like I said before, they didn't scare me or make me feel uncomfortable. In fact, it's almost like I was in the bliss of comfort when I was around them. However, for some reason I feel that the second person involved was the boss or the boss, mainly because he seemed to be answering some of the first's questions and seemed to be directing the process, I guess. As I said before, I never saw them walk towards me or necessarily move other than turning their bodies. It almost seemed like the silver dome wasn't even pulled over my head by hand or anything. Although both of their voices were very different, but both were also very monitory. I haven't seen any more shadow figures since that experience, but the memory is still very strong and vivid in my mind, almost as if I'll never really forget it. At the time I shared this, it had been a little over 2 months since it happened, and my wife advised me to share it here to see if anyone else had a similar situation, or maybe could shed some light on it, which actually happened. I told my nurse about my experience later that day, and she just said it was horrible, and that most people don't hallucinate from this pain reliever, especially at the dose I was given. Overall, I guess it wasn't a bad experience. I actually feel pretty good about it, even if it was a little creepy. And as I said before, I was not afraid or uncomfortable in any way, so any comments or input is greatly appreciated.